Belgium. January 1945. Fog pressed against the hills like wet wool. Inside our M4A3 Sherman, 30 tons of trembling steel, the engine coughed smoke into the cold. Below us, faint silhouettes moved through the haze, Panthers, hunting. Their engines throbbed like distant heartbeats. Sergeant Lewis Hart shouted through the intercom, voice cracking through static. "Reverse. Fall back." But I, Ben Colfield, G*Ner, a former mechanic from Nebraska, knew what that meant. If we followed orders, we'd die by the book. My gloves were stiff with frost, every breath hung in the turret like steam from a dying machine. Somewhere beyond the fog, metal ground against metal. The world narrowed to crosshairs and heartbeat. I remember thinking of something the manual never mentioned. An angle that might keep us alive. Belgium, near Spa. January 1945. The map said roads, our tread said rivers. The thaw had turned lanes into brown glass, and every bend hid a ditch deep enough to drown a tank. We were what remained of Company C, 33rd Armored Battalion, 3 runners from a platoon that had started the month with 5 Shermans. Names became numbers, numbers became silhouettes, silhouettes became smoke. The radios had been dead 2 days. The long antenna on our turret wagged uselessly like a reed, catching fog instead of orders. Static drifted in and out, a thin mosquito whine that meant HQ was somewhere alive and far away. We learned to read other gauges, the tremor in the Ford GAA's idle, the vinegar bite of frozen battery acid, the way a driver's shoulders tighten when the differential snatches on ice. Those were our dispatches. The official doctrine was simple and lethal. Engage head-on. Keep your turret forward. Attack with aggression. The pamphlets from Fort Knox were creased into quarters in my pocket, oil-stained and irrelevant. In Kentucky they taught momentum wins battles. Here, momentum only buried you quicker, nose first, turret helpless, belly exposed to men who knew where to place a **T. Fuel thickened in the lines. Optics fogged the instant a breath slipped its mask. The periscope's rubber eye-cups bit at my cheekbones like winter teeth. We smeared Vaseline on glass and wrapped the telescope tube with rags, a field fix that worked until it didn't. The gyro stabilizer moaned like a church organ in deep cold. We learned to ride its moods and not ask for miracles. Tracks jammed. Clay rose between the chevrons, froze like poured metal, and refused to clear. We carried a breaker bar for the idler wheel and a habit of stopping where we could be pushed rather than where we wished to fight. A Panther could nose into this mud and still throw a 75 mm with the velocity of judgment. Our 75 would answer, but only if I could see and only if we were already pointed the right way. The manual's clean diagrams did not include fog moving sideways at knee height. Spearhead country, they called it when the lines were neat. By January nothing was neat. We ran with fragments, half-tracks without doors, a priest with one track guard, an M8 Greyhound that had lost its turret and become a fast tractor with a beautiful horn. The infantry clung to our stern like barnacles, boots wrapped with burlap, rifles taped at the muzzle. Men knocked on our hull to ask for warmth, we handed out heat in coffee cans. The Panther crews were hunters here. Long 7.5 centimeters G*NS, good glass, low silhouettes. They liked the edges of woods and the backside of slopes. They listened for our transmissions and heard nothing. They watched our exhaust and saw everything. When they appeared, it was never alone. Gray shapes, the color of the weather. If we showed them our front, we showed them our faith, they preferred proofs. Sergeant Hart kept us disciplined. He spoke in ranges and bearings and the word easy when the driver's eyes went glassy. He followed the book when it was a life raft and threw it away when it became an anchor. Still, orders are a country of their own. Someone above us had drawn arrows, and the arrows said push. We pushed until the ground pushed back. Inside the turret, the world was measured in clicks and degrees. I kept notes. Turret traverse at -15 feels slower, smoke rounds leak heat, armor-piercing shudders the teeth more than high explosive. I drew hull silhouettes by lantern light and tried to reconcile doctrine with soil. The diagrams learned mud. The margins learned fear. By the second week, our company net was a rumor. We moved by habit and smell. A burned clutch has a sweet edge. A boiling radiator smells like pennies. A dying engine coughs smoke that turns gray to blue, then to a color your lungs still remember years later. That was our system: taste, touch, angle, instinct. Command lived on paper. We lived in steam and dirt. Between them hung a fog that would not lift. Before the war, I fixed engines that weighed less than a Sherman's track. My father's farm sat 3 miles outside of Grand Island, Nebraska, 40 acres of wind and soil that froze in the winter and cracked in the summer. We called the land the table, because everything on it felt flat and final. You could see storms coming for an hour before they arrived, and still be surprised when they hit. I was born in 1918, the year the last one ended, though no one in our county talked about that war except the widows. My education was grease and gravity. When other boys learned arithmetic, I learned torque, how far you could push a rusted bolt before it snapped. By 12, I was rebuilding Fordsons for neighbors who couldn't afford new parts. By 15, I was the one they called when something quit in the field. Machines listened to me in a way people didn't. One spring, I rebuilt the old Model B tractor's engine backward, intake and exhaust switched, pistons resequenced. My father shouted until the air turned blue. Then we heard it start, smoother than before, the idle steady as breathing. He looked at me like I'd summoned a ghost. "You built it wrong," he said. "That's why it runs right," I told him. That night he didn't speak at dinner, but the next morning he used that same tractor to plow 12 straight hours. He never mentioned the direction of the pistons again. That was Nebraska logic: if it worked, it wasn't wrong. Years later, standing inside a tank turret, that sentence would come back to me with the clarity of scripture. I was 23 when I enlisted. December 1941, the radio said Pearl Harbor, and the next day the recruiting office smelled like tobacco and snow. The sergeant there looked at my calloused hands and said, "Mechanic?" I said, "Better than most." They shipped me to Fort Knox to learn how to keep tanks alive. That's where I first met the manuals, thousands of pages pretending to understand mud, rain, and terror. At Knox, they called me Blueprint Ben because I never trusted a line I hadn't drawn myself. I filled a pocket notebook with numbers: bore elevation, angle of ricochet, armor thickness versus distance. My handwriting was clean, the kind you could build a bridge from. They laughed at that too, the officers and the crews. But when my shells started landing where the enemy hadn't yet appeared, they stopped laughing. I learned to read machines the way others read men. A sputter in the magneto meant a tired coil. A new rattle in the suspension meant a pin slipping free. Steel has moods, it warns you before it breaks, if you care to listen. Most soldiers didn't. They waited for orders, I waited for vibration. In the evenings, I sat by the fuel drum sketching profiles of German armor from field manuals and contraband photographs. I memorized slopes, turret angles, weak points. The M4A3 was supposed to face forward, always. Head-on attack, high morale, constant motion. The doctrine said a confident tank was a living tank. It didn't say what to do when confidence met fog, or when motion buried you axle-deep in Belgian clay. They trained us for speed, not for thought. I passed my G***nary tests with margins so thin they called it instinct. It wasn't instinct, it was calculation disguised as luck. My rounds found seams in armor because I saw the geometry hiding behind the smoke. On leave, I'd walk to the motor pool just to listen to engines cooling after drills, the metallic ticking that sounds like rain on tin roofs. Each one cooled at a slightly different rhythm. I could tell which crew maintained theirs and which ones just prayed. When the orders came for Europe, I carried my father's wrench in one pocket and that notebook in the other. He'd written on the wrench handle with a wood burner, "Measure twice, cut once." I burned my own line beneath it: sometimes you cut before you measure, if the saw's already on fire. That was the only philosophy I ever needed. The Army never taught it, but the war would. When I stepped onto the transport ship at New York Harbor, I could feel the vibration of engines below deck, twin diesels thrumming through steel. The sound felt familiar, almost comforting. I told myself machines were honest, even in war. Men gave orders, steel gave consequences. I trusted consequences more. By the time we landed in France, I'd stopped believing in perfect systems. Every bolt loosens. Every rule breaks under enough pressure. And when it does, the man who knows how it breaks has a better chance of staying alive. I wasn't brave, and I wasn't special. I was simply built for the moment when the system failed. That moment came 1 month later, in Belgium, under fog so thick it swallowed sound, and the manual, for all its pages, had nothing to say about fog. By December, the war had turned quiet in the wrong ways. The noise was still there, artillery in the distance, engines grinding, but underneath it was a kind of order that didn't belong to men anymore. The snow came down clean and steady, burying craters, covering wrecks, erasing mistakes. Rules liked snow, it made them look perfect. We followed doctrine because it gave shape to fear. Face forward. Engage directly. Keep formation. Those were the sentences they hammered into us at Knox. But in the Ardennes, the enemy didn't read our manuals. They moved through fog and tree lanes, fired from angles no map admitted existed. Every time we faced them head-on, one of us didn't come back. At night, inside barns or shell craters, I drew diagrams by lantern light. Silhouettes of our Sherman hull, square, exposed, broad as a barn door. I measured reflections from wet armor, traced the geometry of death. The M4A3 was a boxer built for punching, not dodging. But out here, the fight was never fair. A Panther could wait for hours, invisible, then deliver a single, perfect sh*T. When that round hit, 30 tons became a coffin. I started seeing the pattern. The men who obeyed perfectly died first. The ones who hesitated, improvised, or outright disobeyed, they had a chance. I began sketching the impossible. What if the Sherman didn't face forward? What if we turned it backward in ambush, let the enemy mistake the rear for retreat? The thought was absurd. A tank's rear was its weakest armor, its heart exposed. Every manual warned against it. But the idea wouldn't leave. The numbers made sense before the logic did. At a distance, a reversed Sherman showed half its silhouette. From the front, the broad glacis and turret dominated the view. From behind, the profile narrowed, lines converged, the engine deck broke up the shape. I drew the angles again and again, 30 degrees, 45, 50. Half the surface. Half the chance to die. When I told the crew mechanic, Sergeant Dean, he laughed through a cigarette. "You planning to fight backward, Ben?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm planning to stay alive." He shook his head, told me I'd freeze faster thinking like that. But a few nights later, I caught him tracing one of my sketches with his boot in the dirt. Still, the idea was poison in an army built on procedure. You didn't question the book had buried more men than you ever would. Yet every crater we passed was another argument. The road from Liège to Spa was littered with Shermans burned front first, hatches blown open like mouths mid-prayer. The ones that lived had strange stories, sh*TS deflected by frozen mud, engines failing at just the right time, crews who turned off the road by accident. Survival had stopped belonging to tactics and started belonging to chance. I wanted to borrow some of that chaos and make it mechanical. I started running tests when no one watched. During maintenance halts, I'd mark positions on the turret ring with chalk, rotate the G*N backward, note how the recoil behaved over the engine deck. The balance felt different, steadier somehow, the counterweight of the breech aligning with the transmission hump. When I fired a blank test round, the recoil spread evenly through the hull, less upward jerk. That wasn't luck. That was physics. But physics doesn't have rank. Orders do. And orders said a Sherman must present its strongest armor to the enemy. Facing backward was heresy. One night in late December, we bivouacked near a village that no longer had a name. The church had been flattened, the bell tower lay across the square like a fallen rifle. I sat in the turret with the notebook open on my knees, sketching the silhouette of a reverse tank against the snow. Hart climbed up beside me, his breath fogging in the cold. "You ever stop drawing, Ben?" he asked. "When the war does," I said. He looked over my shoulder, saw the backward profile, and frowned. "That thing looks wrong." "Maybe wrong's what keeps it alive," I said. He didn't answer right away. Down the road, a burned Panther steamed quietly, its crew still inside. The smell was metallic, final. Hart finally said, "You show this to anyone else?" "No. Keep it that way." The army doesn't like philosophers. He was right. The army liked certainty, even when it led you. That night I wrote one line at the bottom of the page: the rules are for when you know where the enemy is. Then I blew out the lantern. The dark felt safer than doctrine. From then on, every time the fog rose, I found myself turning the turret a little more off-center, angling the hull against the manual. It wasn't rebellion, it was geometry. And somewhere in that geometry, survival was waiting to be drawn. January 12, 1945. 0430 hours. Rain the color of graphite fell in thin, endless sheets. The forest around Spa had become a swamp of trunks and shadows. Water ran along every seam of the hull, steam hissed off the exhaust like breath from a horse forced to run too long. We'd been ordered to hold the road to Trois-Ponts, vital supply artery, the brass called it. But to us it was just a ribbon of mud that ate tanks. The ground thawed each morning, froze each night, and by dawn became a battlefield of ice and suction. We advanced 1 mile in 6 hours. Every 20 yards, the treads clawed at the clay, slipped, then caught again with a moan that vibrated through the turret floor. By sunrise, the world vanished into fog. Vision, 50 yards. Sound, distorted. The sky and the earth were the same color, gray. Hart stood half out of the commander's hatch, goggles beaded with rain, the intercom cord coiled like a noose around his neck. "Keep formation," he said through the mic, voice taut. But formation meant nothing now, the lead Sherman was already gone from sight. We crawled forward until the engine began to sputter. Water had seeped into the ignition coil, every spark felt like a dying breath. I glanced through the sight, the world was ghosts and outlines. Then, a flare of orange ahead. The first tank exploded, sudden and soundless at first, then a roar that punched the air out of the cabin. A white flash swallowed gray, and when it cleared, only fire remained. Hit from the left, someone shouted over the intercom. Then static. The second Sherman lurched sideways, tread spinning uselessly. One track slipped into a drainage ditch and vanished underwater. Its turret twisted once, fired blindly, then went still. We were alone. 3 tanks reduced to 1. Reverse. Hart barked. Fall back before they bracket us. The driver threw the lever, gears grinding protest. But even before we moved, I saw the shape through the fog, a sloping silhouette, low and deliberate. A panther. Maybe 2. Their engines throbbed like pulse through the mist. They were waiting. If we backed up, we'd roll straight into their K*LL zone. The road curved into a ravine, perfect for crossfire. I could see it already, our rear armor shining like a mirror to their G*NS, one shell through the engine, another through the fuel cell, 30 tons of proof that we had obeyed every order correctly. The intercom crackled. "All units, fall back to secondary line." The voice was distant, metallic, unaware that half the unit was burning. I hesitated over the elevation wheel. Every instinct screamed that this was the trap I'd drawn in my notebook weeks ago. The geometry was exact: slope, curve, exposure. A textbook ambush, and we were the lesson. "Ben, you hear me?" Hart's voice cut through. "We're pulling out." My hands moved before my mind agreed. I unlatched the turret brake, felt the mechanism groan against frost. "Negative," I muttered. "Not yet." "What the hell are you doing?" "Look at the road," I said. "They want us moving." "That's the SH*T." Through the periscope, the fog glowed faintly from the burning wrecks ahead. The heat distorted the air, turning every branch into a wavering spear. The Panthers were ghosts, patient, precise. I could sense them more than see them. If we retreated, we'd line up with the wrecks, same bearing, same fate. If we advanced, we'd drive into their G*NS. If we stayed, we'd be bracketed by artillery the moment they called our coordinates. For the first time since joining the war, I realized that doing everything right would K*LL us exactly as planned. Hart's voice was quieter now. "You got something better?" I thought of the sketches folded in my breast pocket, the backward silhouette that no one believed in. I didn't know if it would work. I only knew that nothing else would. Rain hissed against the barrel. The G*N sight fogged over, then cleared with a smear of my glove. Somewhere in the white distance, metal clanked, Panther turrets adjusting, hunting. I could almost feel the crosshairs crawling toward us. "Hold," I whispered. "Just hold." Hart looked down through the hatch. His eyes met mine, mud-smeared, hollow, waiting. Outside, the fog thickened. Inside, everything slowed. The hum of the engine dropped to a low growl. The smell of fuel, sweat, and iron mixed with cold breath. We were sitting still in a K*Ling field, surrounded by mathematics. That was the muddy moment, the hinge between orders and survival, between the rule and the angle that broke it. And I knew then that if I didn't act, the next sound would be the shell that wrote our names into the fog. The engine idled at 600 revolutions, rough but steady, a heartbeat under strain. The fog around us pressed in until the world shrank to the sound of metal breathing. Hart waited for command to repeat the order to retreat. None came. Only static and the whisper of rain on armor. I turned from the sight and looked at him. "Let's spin the turret," I said. Hart frowned. "What?" 180 degrees. Aim over the engine deck. "You want to show them our rear?" "Yes." He blinked at me through the dim red light. "That's suicide." "No, Sergeant. It's arithmetic." He hesitated. I saw the thought cross his face, not understanding, but exhaustion. The kind that makes a man gamble because he's already lost too much. "All right, blueprint," he muttered finally. "Break the damn book." The driver stopped breathing as Hart relayed the order. "Turret traverse, full rotation." I released the clutch. The motorized gear whined, slow and defiant, turning 30 tons of steel against every rule written in it. The G*N snout swung over the rear deck, passing through fog like a blind arm seeking the pulse of an unseen enemy. "Elevation -4, I said. "Stabilizer off." The loader glanced up, face pale. "They'll think we're retreating." "Exactly," I answered. Hart climbed halfway out of the hatch, peering into the mist with binoculars useless at 20 yards. "If this works," he said quietly, "they'll never believe it." We cut the headlights, K** led the auxiliary generator. The only light left was the orange reflection from burning wrecks ahead. I could feel the heat even through the armor, distant but alive. I adjusted the G*N sight, compensating for temperature and barometric pressure. Every number came out wrong, yet somehow right. The Sherman's body now faced backward, engine deck to the enemy. Our turret, reversed, pointed forward into the fog. The silhouette looked broken, disoriented, a carcass instead of a threat. A Panther G*N searching through haze would see what he wanted to see, a dead tank showing its back. I pressed my eye to the scope. Visibility, 30 yards. The reticle swam in gray. Somewhere inside that gray, movement flickered, a dark wedge sliding left to right. A Panther easing for position. Hart whispered, "You sure about the range?" "No," I said. "That's the point." The loader slid a shell from the rack, armor-piercing, M61, base fuse intact. The casing clanged softly as it seated in the breech. He tapped the round with his palm, a ritual for luck. Up. I kept the G*N just below their likely line of sight. The idea was simple, let them aim for the wrong part of us. Minutes passed. Or seconds. Time in a tank is elastic, it stretches when fear takes hold. Then came the sound, a muffled engine roar, followed by the shriek of a shell tearing air. The first German round hit somewhere ahead of us, high and left. The impact shuddered through the mud, a concussion rather than a wound. They had fired at our front, expecting armor, not weakness. They were shooting at ghosts. Hart's voice was steady now. G*N, on target. "On," I said. Through the mist, I caught the shimmer of exhaust from their muzzle flash. Range maybe 200 yards. I adjusted 3 mils down, breathed once, and squeezed. The 75mm roared, recoil slamming back through my shoulders into the hull. The smell of cordite filled the turret, sharp as burnt rubber. For half a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then the fog tore apart like a curtain, revealing a bloom of orange fire. The Panthers' turret lifted, twisted, then vanished in smoke. The loader was already grabbing another round. "Hit confirmed," he shouted. I said nothing, just recalibrated elevation. The second target moved right, trying to flank. Its outline flickered, uncertain. I compensated for speed, wind, and fear, all variables equal in war, and fired again. Another roar. Another silence. Then a second explosion, deeper this time. The fog flashed bright enough to reveal twisted trees. Inside the tank, the intercom hissed. Someone laughed, nervous, high-pitched, almost hysterical. The radio operator, maybe. He mounted it the wrong way, he gasped, and suddenly the tank became a hunter. Hart smiled, just a small line beneath the grime. "He's not wrong," he said. Outside, the smoke rolled low, black over gray. 2 Panthers gone. The third was somewhere behind them, deciding whether to advance or disappear. We waited. The G*N barrel smoked faintly, breathing in rhythm with the engine. "Think they'll fall for it twice?" Hart asked. "If they're alive," I said, "they won't." He nodded once. "Then we move before the fog does." I rotated the turret back to center. The engine growled to life, a rough, wet sound of defiance. The rulebook lay shredded somewhere between SPA and reason, and all we had left was the proof that disobedience, once aimed correctly, could K*LL cleaner than any command. That was the moment the manual ended, and instinct began. The next few minutes blurred into light, recoil, and static. Time lost shape. We were no longer following battle drills, only physics and instinct. The fog pulsed with every sh*T, flashing white and orange, then folding back into gray like a wound that refused to close. The first Panther was a skeleton now, its turret torn off and resting beside the hull at an impossible angle. The second burned with a low, steady flame that hissed against the rain. But there was a third, deeper in the mist, and I could feel its engine through the soles of my boots, that slow, deliberate idle of a crew deciding whether to avenge or survive. Hart's voice came low through the intercom. "Ben, he's circling right." "Copy," I said. "Let him." I slewed the turret a few degrees, listening for the change in pitch that meant a Panther was pivoting, treads grinding, one track locked, one dragging. The sound came, faint but certain. He was trying to flank us, to get a clean sh*T at what he thought was our front armor, the heavy plate now hidden by fog and luck. We had reversed our geometry, he had not. "Loader, AP," I said. "Up. Range 150. Low silhouette. Wait for the flash." We waited. Somewhere ahead, the enemy G*N barked, too high, the shell tearing branches instead of armor. A heartbeat later, I saw the flash. I fired into it. The 75mm answered with thunder. Through the clearing smoke, a dark form buckled. The Panther jerked forward, then stopped mid-rotation. A faint secondary blast rolled its hull over like a dying animal. The shock wave hit us a second later, rattling wrenches from their racks. The loader exhaled through his teeth. 3 down. "Don't count," I said. "Just breathe." For a moment, the world was soundless except for rain hissing on hot metal. I could smell oil burning, ours, theirs, the air's. My ears rang, the intercom was a whispering ghost. Hart tapped my shoulder and pointed ahead. Shadows moved, infantry, small figures stumbling toward the wrecks. I couldn't tell if they were Germans fleeing or Americans lost. "Hold fire," he said. We watched through the periscope. Shapes ran between flames like moths around lanterns. Then the fog thickened again, hiding them all. The radio operator's voice cracked through the headset. "Command wants confirmation of contact." "Are you still engaged?" Hart keyed the mic. "Negative, enemy armor destroyed." "Repeat, destroyed." "We're holding position." Static. Then disbelief. "Say again, destroyed?" Hart smiled faintly. "Affirmative." No cheer followed. No victory music. Just the deep mechanical sigh of the engine settling back to idle. 30 tons of steel relaxing after panic. I leaned against the sight and wiped condensation from the glass. My gloves smelled of cordite and sweat. Outside, the fog glowed orange from burning hulls. The rain turned black where it touched them, running down in rivulets that looked like veins. For the first time all day, the wind shifted. It blew toward us, carrying heat and the faint, chemical sweetness of spent fuel. I closed the hatch and let the smell stay outside. Hart spoke quietly, almost to himself. "They'll call this luck." "It isn't," I said. "No," he agreed. "But it'll sound better in the report." We sat there a long time without speaking. The loader cleaned the breach with a rag torn from his sleeve. The driver drummed his fingers against the control levers, a habit of nerves. Every man's breath fogged in the red light, slow and uneven. None of us wanted to look at the periscope again. Finally, Hart said, "Blueprint, if anyone asks, you tell them we lost orientation." Fog. Confusion. "You got that?" "Understood," I answered. He nodded. "They won't believe it anyway." The fog began to lift in ragged curtains, revealing what we'd done. 3 black hulks smoldering across the valley, their armor blistered and steaming. Trees splintered by shock waves leaned at broken angles. The snow beneath them had melted into black water that reflected the fires like small, dying suns. Somewhere down the road, distant engines growled, our reinforcements, late by hours. They would find us here, the lone survivor of a lost formation, the impossible geometry of a backward-facing Sherman surrounded by the proof of its heresy. Hart climbed out onto the hull, helmet off, letting the rain wash soot from his face. I watched him from the turret. He looked smaller out there, almost civilian again. He turned once toward the wrecks, then toward the east. "They'll think we were lucky," he said. "Let them," I replied. We stayed in that field until dusk, engine idling, G*N cooling, fog dissolving into drizzle. No one mentioned the rule we had broken. No one mentioned that it had saved us. In war, victory is measured by what still breathes when the shooting stops. That evening, against every instruction ever printed, we were still breathing. When the smoke settled, the valley returned to silence, the kind of silence that made your heartbeat sound like artillery. Rain hissed on cooling armor. Somewhere to the east, a delayed explosion cracked, echoing off the hills like an afterthought. The fight was over. What remained were shapes, 3 German hulks cooling in the drizzle, and 1 Sherman facing the wrong direction, its G*N still warm, its crew waiting for judgment. We didn't speak for nearly an hour. No one wanted to. Words might shatter the illusion that we'd survived. The driver, Crow, lit a cigarette, but it tasted like engine oil. The loader, Raskin, kept staring at the G*N's breach, as if afraid to touch it again. Hart leaned against the periscope, hands folded, breathing slow. I could see his reflection in the glass, eyes hollow, expression unreadable. At 1,600 hours, radio contact came through. A liaison jeep from headquarters had found our trail and wanted coordinates. Hart replied with 2 words, "Area secure." He didn't mention how. By dusk, we heard engines, American this time. A column of M10s and half-tracks rolled up the slope, their searchlights probing the mist. One stopped beside us. A major climbed down, mud up to his knees, clipboard in hand. He looked at our tank, then at the wrecks ahead. "Who the hell engaged?" Hart answered. "Company C, 33rd. The major frowned. "You were ordered to withdraw." "Yes, sir," Hart said evenly. "We must have misunderstood the direction." The major walked around the Sherman, studying its reversed orientation, the burned mud, the pattern of shell impacts. "You fired from this position?" "Yes, sir." "Facing away from the enemy?" Hart didn't blink. "Yes, sir." The major took off his gloves, rubbed his temples, then scribbled something on his pad. "You do realize what that looks like?" "Alive," Hart said. He didn't argue. They were short on victories that month. Dead tanks didn't answer paperwork. They sent us back to the motor pool for refit. The mechanics there gathered around like surgeons inspecting a miracle. They traced the impact marks, the burn lines, the direction of the recoil dents. "You turned the G*N over the engine?" one asked. I nodded. "Hell," he muttered, "and it worked?" I didn't answer. I just handed him the maintenance sheet with a single note under remarks, turret rotation test complete. For 3 days, nobody said anything official. Our after-action report vanished somewhere between battalion and corps. I assumed that was the end of it. Then, on the 4th morning, Hart and I were called to headquarters. Inside a canvas tent that smelled of wet wool and diesel, a colonel read our statement in silence. When he finished, he placed it on the desk and said, "You're aware that deliberate deviation from tactical order can be classified as insubordination?" "Yes, sir." "Then explain why you're not court-martialed right now." Hart looked at me, then back at the colonel. "Because we're the ones who can explain how 3 Panthers ended up as bonfires." The colonel didn't reply. He closed the folder, tapped it once with his pen, and said, "Consider yourselves corrected but not condemned." He paused. "Next time, try not to be clever in writing. The army hates clever." We left without saluting. Outside, the rain had frozen into sleet. The ground was a mirror of ice. I remember thinking how strange it was that the same cold that K*-lead engines could preserve memory. A week later, I found a single line in the staff bulletin posted by the field kitchen. It read, "Consider reverse turret positioning under fog or reduced visibility conditions." No signature. No context. Just words. I tore the sheet down and folded it into my pocket. When I showed it to Hart, he smiled without humor. "They'll call it a tactical adjustment," he said. "They can call it anything they like," I answered. Back at the depot, the crew stripped and cleaned the G*N. Raskin asked if we'd do it again. I told him the truth, only if we have to. The manual's still heavier than the tank. That night, the men from another unit stopped by our quarters. They wanted to hear the story, what we saw, how it felt, how close it had been. I told them nothing. I just said, "Fog. Wrong bearings. Lucky angles." They nodded like believers hearing a sermon they couldn't quite understand. In war, legend travels faster than orders. By the next morning, someone had already painted on our Sherman's hull, "Backward bastards." Hart didn't make them wash it off. 2 days later, we were ordered east again. The snow was deeper, the sky lower, the rules unchanged. Only the geometry had shifted. Every time I swung the turret, I felt the weight of that forbidden angle, the one that had saved us. Somewhere between Spa and Cologne, the manual began to sound less like scripture and more like suggestion. The fog hadn't just hidden the enemy, it had hidden permission. And once you've lived through that kind of silence, you never really hear orders the same way again. After the war, the cold followed me home. Not the weather, Nebraska's winters had always been cruel, but the kind that sits behind your ribs and waits for noise. When the wind came through the barn slats, it sounded like distant artillery. When the tractor backfired, I flinched before I realized I was the only one still ducking. The land hadn't changed. Same rows of corn, same red horizon, same silence. My father's hands had grown slower, the skin like parchment over bone. He didn't ask about Europe. He didn't have to. He'd seen my eyes when I stepped off the train, how they kept scanning the horizon for smoke that wasn't there. The first thing I fixed was the old tractor, the one I'd rebuilt backward when I was 17. It had sat under a tarp for 4 winters, the paint flaked away, tires sunk into the dirt. I drained the tank, replaced the plugs, turned the crank. The engine hesitated, coughed, then settled into a steady hum. It still ran smoother in reverse than forward. My father stood beside me, watching the exhaust drift into the cold air. "Still runs wrong," he said. "Still runs," I answered. Work helped. I repaired harvesters, rewired grain dryers, mended fences. At night, when the tools were quiet, I'd sit in the barn loft with my old pocket notebook. The pages were brittle now, the pencil lines smudged, but the sketches were all there, turret arcs, sh*T trajectories, reflections, and that single reversed outline of a Sherman drawn in black grease. I'd trace the lines with my thumb until they faded into my skin. In town, the Legion Hall filled with veterans. They drank, argued about generals, and told the same stories louder each year. I went once, out of courtesy. A man from the 101st told me he'd heard about a tank crew near Spa that had turned around and led half a company of Panthers. I told him I'd heard that one too. He laughed, said the story was probably exaggerated. I agreed. Truth rarely survives paperwork. Sometimes I'd get letters from old crewmen. Crow wrote from Detroit, said he couldn't sit in traffic anymore, the smell of oil made him sick. Raskin sent a Christmas card from Oregon with a picture of his newborn daughter and a note that simply said, "Still breathing." Hart never wrote. He disappeared into some training command in Texas, teaching others how to follow rules better than we had. But the war had a way of echoing through the smallest things. One winter morning in '48, a magazine arrived in the mail, Army Ordnance Quarterly. Buried in the technical section was a brief article on tank tactics in adverse weather. Paragraph 4 read, "Reverse hull alignment may improve survivability under certain terrain and visibility conditions." No author listed. No citations. Just the words, clean and quiet. I stared at the line for a long time. It was like seeing your own handwriting on a gravestone. Later that year, a recruiter from Fort Knox stopped by the county fair, showing films to local boys about modern armor. I lingered at the back of the crowd. On the screen, an instructor demonstrated alternative positioning for urban and fog conditions. The turret rotated, the hull faced away. The camera paused to show how it reduced target profile. The audience clapped. The instructor called it adaptive combat logic. I left before the reel finished. Outside, the air smelled of fried dough and gasoline. The fairground lights flickered against the night, and for a moment the haze around them looked like Belgian fog. Back home, I took the wrench my father had given me, the one with our twin mottos burned into the handle, and hung it above the workbench. Below it, I tacked that page from the magazine. Every time I walked past, I read the sentence again, "Reverse hull alignment may improve survivability." No medals hung beside it. No photographs. Just the wrench, the paper, and the silence of a truth too small for history. Sometimes, on long nights when the wind pushed against the barn doors, I'd imagine the sound of engines in the distance. I'd picture that day near Spa, the fog, the burning shapes, the moment when forward and backward traded places. The manuals had changed, the logic had not. The world still believed in straight lines, in orders that moved from top to bottom. But machines, like men, often survived by bending. When neighbors asked what I did in the war, I usually said, "I turned things around." They laughed, thinking it was a mechanic's joke. I let them. Because the truth was simpler than the story. Sometimes the only way to live through fire is to face the other way and keep moving, slowly, deliberately, against every order ever written. He turned the turret the wrong way. And the tank became a hunter. They taught us to face forward, to trust the manual, to meet death with geometry and faith. But war isn't a classroom. It's a field of fog where the rules dissolve faster than breath on glass. That winter in Belgium, we learned the one truth no doctrine dared print: survival doesn't follow direction, it follows understanding. They called it an error, then a tactic, then nothing at all. History prefers order. But somewhere in a manual at Fort Knox, a single line remains, a quiet echo of that morning. Reverse hull alignment may improve survivability under certain terrain and visibility conditions. No author. No signature. Just the memory of one backward tank in the fog, facing the wrong way. And living because of it.